President Biden says the US is on course to complete the evacuation mission in Afghanistan by his deadline of next Tuesday. In practical terms, that will mean a desperate scramble for thousands of civilians to try and get a flight in the next 48 hours or so. This despite Afghan nationals being told by the Taliban to stay at home. Let's get the very latest now with our Chief International Correspondent, Lyse Doucet, who is there for us now. And just bring us up to date on what that means for Afghan nationals at the moment, Lyse.
Well, President Biden used the phrase that the evacuation, the drawdown of the last US-led forces here in Afghanistan is on course to finish by August the 31st. But for thousands and thousands in Afghan, it's an obstacle course that it's becoming increasingly clear they simply cannot win. We're getting reports every hour of Afghans pleading, begging for help. They say they have all the documents to leave. Some of them are interpreters who had worked for the US military. They say they have what's called a special immigrant visa, but they're being turned back as they approach the gates at Kabul International Airport. And then there are thousands more who see this race to the exit, and they simply are, in these last days, desperate to find a way, any way out. We saw some of the Taliban leaders this morning, and they said to us that the only Afghans who should be going to the airport are those cleared by the United States. Let's get the latest on all these developments with this report from our correspondent Nomia Iqbal, who's in Washington.
US troops are on the ground in Kabul, trying to help thousands of people leave Afghanistan. More than 7,000 miles away, their commander-in-chief stuck to his plan.
The sooner we can finish, the better. Each day of operations brings added risk to our troops. But the completion by August 31st depends upon the Taliban continuing to cooperate and allow access to the airport for those who we're transporting out, and no disruptions to our operations.
President Biden rejected pleas from other G7 nations to extend the deadline for the evacuation mission. Without the power of the US military, the UK has admitted it wouldn't have the ability to stay. However, Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who chaired the meeting, says the leaders agreed a roadmap for engaging with the Taliban.
The number one condition we're setting as G7 is that they've got to guarantee right the way through August the 31st and beyond, safe passage for those who want to come out.
But this poses a risk. It is the Taliban who ultimately is deciding this deadline, because the group says the US and allied forces have to leave by the end of the month or face consequences. The Biden administration is confident it can make the deadline, and that whoever wants to leave will be able to. Since August the 14th, he says more than 70,000 people, including Afghan allies, have been flown out of harm's way. The US has already begun to leave, and as hundreds of soldiers fly back home, the numbers of desperate people arriving at Kabul airport keeps increasing. Just under a week is all they have to get out, as the Taliban tightens its grip on Afghanistan. Nomia Iqbal, BBC News, Washington.
And of course, we must remember that what's happening at Kabul International Airport and the road to reach this exit point is just one small space in Afghanistan. Tens of millions of Afghans have no way out. Many don't want to leave. Most are just waiting to see what will it mean to their own lives, to their families, to their safety and to their future once the Taliban re-establish their Islamic Emirate. Day by day, we see the shops, some of the shops are cautiously reopening. Government offices too are starting to open their doors. In some, women employees are being told to stay at home for now. It's simply not safe for you yet. And in others, it's been made absolutely clear that the jobs which were taken by women should now go to the men.
Situation in Panjshir at the moment, the one area that hasn't or didn't fall to the Taliban. What sort of fight is brewing there?
Well, it's very much a defiant fight. It's the last redoubt of the political leaders and prominent commanders who say they simply cannot surrender, make peace with the Taliban. One of the leaders, of course, is the former Vice President Amrullah Saleh, who has been one of the most vehement, vociferous critics of the Taliban. He must fear for his own life. But of course, he's not a man of fear. He's survived several assassination attempts so far. But they have been saying that the Taliban are encroaching. They're choking the supply points in. It's not quite clear what the Taliban's strategy will be, but all signs are that they're not going to let this last redoubt in Panjshir last for long.
Lyse in Kabul. Thank you very much indeed, Lyse Doucet. Well, during President Biden's address, he detailed the potential threat to the United States and allied forces and specified one group, ISIS-K. This is what he had to say.
The longer we stay, starting with the acute and growing risk of an attack by a terrorist group known as ISIS-K, an ISIS affiliate in Afghanistan, which is a sworn enemy of the Taliban as well. Every day we're on the ground is another day we know that ISIS-K is seeking to target the airport and attack both U.S. and allied forces and innocent civilians.
Well, I asked our security correspondent, Frank Gardner, what was ISIS-K?
Right, well, what he's referring to is the affiliate of ISIS, Islamic State, that is active in eastern Afghanistan and Pakistan. It's known as, they call themselves ISIS Khorasan province. Khorasan is an old description for a vast area of eastern Iran and Afghanistan. And it's the self-styled name that they've given themselves. There are not very many of them. They were driven out of their strongholds in two Afghan provinces, Nangarhar and Kunar. They probably number less than 1,000, but they have carried out a number of attacks. They've been around since January 2015. They've attacked both Afghan government security forces, the US, and the Taliban, even when the Taliban were themselves insurgents. So they're basically enemies of everybody, and they are looking for disruption and chaos, which is exactly why this threat reporting came in a few days ago that they were looking to attack the crowds at the airport.
In terms of ISIS-K, though, they don't think the Taliban is devout enough. Who is funding them?
Well, that's a very good question. They have had some drift of recruits coming across from the Middle East, not very many, but some, a few dozen at least, from Syria and Iraq. They have been able to get funding, I think, reportedly, from some of the madrasas in Pakistan, where they do have a following. ISIS has always presented itself as the more extreme version of Al-Qaeda. The two are rivals. You would think that they'd be on the same page. They both share a desire to have a very strict interpretation of Sharia, of Islamic law, and to have an emirate or a caliphate on that basis. But whereas the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, who were closely entwined with them, the Taliban are only interested within the borders of Afghanistan. ISIS, of course, are expansionist, and they're being very active in parts of Africa at the moment. And they have pledged their allegiance when they first set up to at the time, the ISIS leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who, of course, has been killed some time ago. So I think that they are almost certainly going to become the new insurgents in Afghanistan, and they are going to be a thorn in the side for the Taliban, the new Taliban-dominated government, as well as possibly some kind of national resistance from the Panjshir Valley. So those are the two security threats, I think, that are facing the Taliban government.